At the gate of a marae near Kaitaia, a man waits barefoot on the grass for the call that tells him when it is right to walk forward. Behind him, the light is climbing out of the sea. 300 miles south, on the Gisborne coast, a family eats breakfast while the kitchen clock reads earlier than almost any clock on the planet. In Auckland, a commuter ferry fills for the 15-minute crossing and pushes off as the same light slides west across the harbour. This is New Zealand. A country of roughly 5 million people strung along 2 long islands, a place that wakes before nearly every other nation on Earth, while most of its own citizens are still asleep. It is the last large land that humans ever found, and yet among the first to meet each morning. At Waitangi, 2 signed texts from 1840 bear a single name and still mean 2 different things. What follows is a journey down both islands, through fire and ice, through the people who sailed here last, the promise written at Waitangi, and the 800 sheep and the hangi pit that feed a working country. Before most of the country is awake, the first light climbs out of the Pacific and reaches the far north, where New Zealand narrows to a thin finger of land between 2 seas. Headlands darken against the water, wet grass shines along the road edges, and the morning holds for a few minutes at the edge of the world before the day begins moving west across the islands. New Zealand sits just west of the international dateline. Outside a scattering of small Pacific islands, this is among the first inhabited land on Earth to turn into each new day. Roughly 5 million people live across its 2 islands, and most are still asleep when the first coast brightens, when the sun reaches these beaches and hills before it reaches almost anyone else alive. The privilege arrives without ceremony. It comes as light on water, in the dark before work. South, down that coast, the first city is already awake. Fishing boats nose out of Gisborne harbour while the streetlights still burn, their engines low across the water, their decks lit yellow against the last of the dark. Gisborne is long called the first city in the world to see the sun. And on a clear morning, that claim belongs to whoever happens to be out before 6. A deckhand coiling rope, a baker turning on the ovens, a runner on the empty waterfront. It is a working town of growers and fishers, not a monument to its own record. The distinction is simply lived, then set aside as the day's real work begins. 300 miles northwest, the largest city is lifting off the water. A commuter ferry pushes across Auckland Harbour, its wake folding white behind it, the grey-gold skyline drawing closer by the minute. On the upper deck, a woman, sits with her breakfast balanced on her knees, toast in one hand, tea steaming from a thermos in the other, the cup warm against her palms as the city slides past the railing. Auckland holds roughly a third of the entire country, about 1.7 million people, and the harbour is its main artery, the morning ferry, its heartbeat made visible. For her, the crossing is ordinary, 15 minutes of quiet before the office. Yet the light, falling across her thermos, is the first light that found the gate, grown an hour older and moved west across the sea. Further south, the capital climbs into its own morning. The red cable car hauls up through the hillside houses of Wellington, past back gardens and timber walls, toward the light waiting at the top of the slope. Wellington is the seat of government, the country's southern pivot on the North Island, a compact capital pressed between a deep harbour and steep hills, a place where the working day begins on an incline. The carriage rises, the brakes hiss, and the city opens below. Ferries in the harbour, office towers catching the sun, the wind already moving as it almost always does here. The doors fold open. Another working morning steps out onto the hill. Across the strait, on the other island, the day arrives again. Light moves down a quiet Christchurch street, falling across new buildings standing among older ones, across glass and fresh brick set beside stone that is clearly weighted longer. Christchurch is the South Island's largest city, spread over the flat Canterbury Plains, and the sunrise that woke the Marae Gate and the harbour ferry now reaches here last, at the far southern end of the country's morning. The streets look finished, the buildings new and neat in the early sun. But the newness has a reason, and the reason is not yet spoken, only present, standing quietly in the gaps between the older walls. The cities look settled, the ground beneath them is not. Back on the North Island, before the city streetlights have switched off, Rotorua is already breathing. Steam rises through the streets at dawn, drifting up between fences and parked cars, curling out of a drain at the curb, hanging over back gardens where it has hung for longer than anyone can remember. The smell of sulphur sits over the whole town, in the laundry on the line, in the schoolyards, a faint warmth folded into the cold air. Rotorua sits on one of the most active geothermal fields on Earth. The ground vents heat in backyards and roadside ditches, and a geyser throws a column of water white against the grey sky, falls back, gathers itself, and throws it again. People here have built their houses directly on top of all this and learned to live with a planet that leaks quietly into ordinary streets. The land does not sit still, it breathes, and the town breathes with it. South of the steam, the plateau lifts into fire. The volcanic cones of Tongariro and the snow-streaked bulk of Mount Ruapehu stand over a dark tussock plain, their slopes scoured bare, the air thin and clean. Tongariro became the country's first national park in 1887, its peaks gifted by a Maori chief to keep them whole and unsold. Ruapehu is an active volcano, and it last erupted in this century, sending ash across the plateau, within the memory of people now driving past it. These mountains are the volcanic spine running up the center of the North Island, the line of heat the country is built along. Climbers cross the saddles, skiers ride the upper slopes through winter, and beneath them, the mountain holds its heat and waits. The beauty here is also a warning, written in old lava and fresh snow. Across the water on the South Island, fire gives way to rising rock and ice. The Southern Alps run the length of the horizon, a wall of stone and snow that splits the island in two. And Aoraki, Mount Cook, holds the highest point, snow smoking off its summit ridge in a long white banner. Aoraki, Mount Cook, rises to about 3,724 meters. The Alps are still growing, pushed up several millimeters every year as two tectonic plates grind into one another far below, then worn back down by ice and rivers almost as fast as they rise. The mountains a climber stands on this year are not quite the mountains that stood there a decade ago. The country is, quite literally, unfinished, its highest ground still being lifted toward the sky while the weather files it away. Snow drifts off the ridge, catches the light, and is gone. The rock beneath it goes on climbing, a few millimeters at a time, too slow to see and too steady to stop. Where the ice has already finished its work, the mountains stand in the water. At Milford Sound, sheer cliffs drop straight into a dark, still inlet, and a waterfall threads down rock the height of a city tower, breaking into mist before it reaches the surface. Milford was carved by glaciers that ground these valleys out over thousands of years and then retreated, leaving walls of bare stone and one of the wettest places in the whole country, where rain falls most days of the year and feeds 100 temporary waterfalls down the cliffs. If the volcanoes are fire still working, this is ice that has already done its making and gone. The inlet lies flat as poured glass. The cliffs hold their own reflection. Where Rotorua breathes and Ruapehu waits, Milford simply stands, finished. The glacier's signature left in stone long after the glacier itself has melted back into the high valleys and the past. All of this making and unmaking has a cost. And on the South Island, it is paid in kitchens. On 22nd February 2011, at 51 minutes past noon, a magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck Christchurch. In one man's kitchen, the cups rattled in the cupboard, the kettle slid along the bench, and the floor moved in a way no floor is meant to move. While outside the city he had lived in his whole life came apart. The earthquake killed 185 people. It brought down a cathedral, office towers, and ordinary brick walls, and pushed grey silt up through whole streets. The same forces that raise the Alps a few millimeters a year and send the Rotorua geysers into the sky arrived that afternoon at the scale of a single house, a single bench, a single cupboard of shaking cups. For that man, and for tens of thousands like him, the land stopped being scenery and became the thing that had taken the city's heart. The new walls now standing among the old, the ones the morning light falls across, all began here, in the dust of that afternoon. This is the price of a homeland still under construction. It is not paid in the abstract, and yet people had already crossed thousands of miles of open ocean to find exactly this restless ground, and to call it home. The ocean those people crossed carries no road and keeps no record. Somewhere far out on the open Pacific, generations before any European sail rose over the horizon, a double-hulled voyaging canoe rides a long swell, while its navigator reads a sky and a sea that hold no landmarks at all. The angle of a star as it sets on the rim of the world, the run of the swells against the hull, the flight of a single bird at dusk pointing toward land, still days out of sight. These are the waka, the great ocean canoes of Polynesia, and around the year 1300 they reach these two islands, the last large and habitable land anywhere on Earth to receive human beings. By tradition, it is the navigator Kupe who finds them first, naming the long white cloud standing over the coast. The people who step ashore become the Maori. Their landing is the final chapter in the greatest feat of navigation humans have ever managed. A slow fan of voyages crossing empty water, island by island, until there is simply no more ocean to cross and no more land to find. South again, in a village on the geothermal flats at Rotorua, that long inheritance lives at the scale of an ordinary morning. Steam drifts between carved meeting houses whose gable boards are worked with the faces of ancestors, every spiral and notch cut to carry a name and a line of descent forward in wood. On the marae, the open ground before the meeting house, a welcome unfolds the way it has for centuries, and at its heart, two people lean in, until nose touches nose and forehead touches forehead, and hold there, and breathe in once, together. This is the hongi, the pressing of breath into breath, the moment a visitor stops being a stranger and is taken in. A grandmother cups a small child's head and guides it gently to an elder's, teaching the child the weight and the stillness of it. One breath passing between 3 generations in a doorway full of rising steam. The greeting lasts only a moment. What it carries is older than the town around it. When the welcome turns to performance, the ground itself seems to take up the rhythm. A line of men and women drives into the haka, feet stamping flat against the boards, hands beating thighs and chests, eyes wide, tongues out, the chant rising from somewhere far below the ordinary voice. Abroad, the haka is known mostly as the dance the national rugby team performs before a match, but it has always been far more than a challenge flung at an opponent. It is danced at funerals and at weddings, to honor a guest and to grieve a death, to mark a graduation or a homecoming, one stamped rhythm carrying a community's pride and sorrow and welcome in a single body of sound. To stand in front of it is to feel the floor move underfoot. That heritage is no longer the whole story of who lives here. Of roughly 5 million New Zealanders, about 1 in 6 is Maori, close to 900,000 people, the descendants of those last great voyages. And the voyaging never entirely stopped. Through the 20th century, families came from Samoa, Tonga, the Cook Islands, Niue and Fiji, settling above all in Auckland, until the city came to hold more Pacific Islanders than any other place on Earth. More than any town in the islands themselves, a Polynesian capital built on a southern harbour. Pacific peoples now number around 8 in every 100 New Zealanders. Along a single Auckland street, a Sunday service in Samoan lets out beside a Tongan bakery and a Cook Islands hall. The old ocean crossings gathered now into one city's ordinary weekend. But long before these later arrivals, other ships had come, carrying traders and missionaries and a written promise. On a winter morning in 1840, that promise was set down on paper at a place called Waitangi, in 2 languages that did not say the same thing.
At Waitangi, on the upper edge of the Bay of Islands, a wide lawn runs down toward the water, and a great carved meeting house and a single tall flagstaff stand where the country's founding document was signed. On 6th February 1840, several hundred Maori chiefs gathered here with representatives of the British Crown, among them a naval officer named William Hobson, sent to bring these islands under British law, while securing, on paper, the rights of the people already living on them. Through a long day of debate under canvas, chiefs rose to speak for and against what was offered. Some warning against it, others urging that the newcomers be kept close rather than refused. Some signed that day. A hand comes down to the paper, ink dark on the mark, the pressure of one fingertip or one carved name, turning an argument in the air into something that can be folded, carried, and kept. Copies were carried the length of the country through the following months, and in the end, somewhere around 500 chiefs put their names or their marks to the Treaty of Waitangi. It was meant to be a beginning shared by two peoples. It became the most argued over page in the nation's history. The trouble is written into the document itself, because there is not one treaty, but two. The English text and the Maori text, signed on one day under one name, do not say the same thing. In the English version, the chiefs surrender sovereignty to the crown completely and forever. In the Maori version, the one nearly all of them actually signed, the word for what they give up means something closer to governance, the right to keep order, while the chiefs are promised full and undisturbed authority over their lands, their villages, and their treasures. One text hands over a country, the other lends out a kind of management and keeps the ownership. Both were signed in good faith by people who could not read the other side's language. The gap between the two has never fully closed. Almost everything that followed grew in that gap. What followed, the Maori side of the page had not agreed to. As settlers arrived in growing numbers and pressed for land, the promised authority was steadily overridden, sale by sale and survey by survey. Through the 1860s, disputes over who could sell and who could keep turned into open war. A series of campaigns across the North Island, now known as the New Zealand Wars, fought between Crown forces and Maori who refused to give up their ground. Decades earlier, the chief Honeheke had been among the first to sign at Waitangi. Within 5 years, he was cutting down the British flagstaff above the bay, 4 separate times, in protest at what the treaty had already become. When the fighting ended, the government confiscated vast areas of Maori land from tribes it judged to have rebelled, much of it taken from communities that had never taken up arms at all. Millions of acres passed out of Maori hands within a single generation. In Wellington, a war memorial carries the names of the country's later dead. The earliest wars over the treaty left wounds no carved stone records, in families that lost the very ground beneath them. More than a century passed before the country began, formally, to reckon with that gap. In 1975, the government established a standing tribunal to hear Maori claims of broken promises reaching all the way back to 1840. And since then, the Crown has issued formal apologies
and returned land and money to tribe after tribe, in settlements negotiated in the very city where the laws were once made against them. In Wellington, in the government buildings above the harbour, the treaty is no longer a relic under glass, but a living argument, cited in courtrooms and written into the country's law. Every year, on 6 February, the nation marks Waitangi Day, and every year, the day carries both celebration and protest. Speeches of unity standing beside speeches of grievance on the lawn where the chiefs once argued under canvas. The two texts still mean two things. The country has decided, slowly and incompletely, to hold both at once, to keep talking across the gap, rather than pretend it was ever closed. And whatever is still being argued on that lawn, the land it concerns has, every single morning, to be worked. Far south of the gate where the day began, on a hill country station in the South Island High Country, the working country gets to its feet before dawn. A farmer moves a flock of 800 ewes down a brown hillside with 2 dogs and a whistle. The animals pouring through a gate like water finding its level. New Zealand holds roughly 25 million sheep, about 5 for every person in the country. And for a century and a half, the wealth of these islands has walked on 4 legs across hills like this one. In the shearing shed, the work is fast and old. A shearer bends a ewe between his knees, runs the handpiece along her belly and up her flank, and the fleece comes away in a single piece in under 2 minutes, dropped onto a table where it is skirted, graded, and pressed into bales, bound for mills on the far side of the world. The shed smells of lanolin and diesel and warm wool. By the time the sun is properly up, the first work of the day is already loaded on a truck. Grass that carries the sheep feeds the herds down on the flats. Before 5 in the morning, in a milking shed on the Canterbury Plains, the cows file in on their own, knowing the order and the hour, and the cups go on under a low electric hum while it is still dark outside. Dairy is now the country's largest export earner. Milk powder, butter and cheese leave New Zealand for tables across Asia and the Middle East. A daily white tide turned into money. A farmer hoses down the yard. The herd files out again into the paddock, and steam lifts off their backs in the cold first light. It is unglamorous, relentless work, twice a day, every day, in a country where the weather does much of the deciding. The land that is still being built is also, before dawn, being milked. Further north and east, where the hills shelter long valleys from the wind, a slower crop ripens. In Marlborough, rows of vines run dead straight across the gravel terraces the old rivers left behind. And in autumn, the pickers move down them at first light, cutting bunches into bins while the fruit is still cold. New Zealand wine, and Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc above all, has gone in a single generation from almost nothing to bottles poured in London and New York and Tokyo. The first commercial vines went into this ground in the 1970s. Now, the harvest is one of the country's signatures. A grower walks a row, presses a single grape between finger and thumb, tastes it, and decides the picking will start tomorrow. The whole season narrowed to the judgment of one tongue on one morning. All of this, the wool, the milk, and the wine, is what the country sells to the world. What it keeps for itself shows up closer to home. On a Saturday morning at a farmer's market in a city car park or a small town square, where the same land arrives at a human scale. Trestle tables of stone fruit and honey and cheese, a queue for coffee, a grower counting change into a child's open hand. And on the day a family gathers, the oldest cooking of all comes out of the ground. A hangi begins hours before anyone eats, with stones heated in a fire until they glow, lowered into a pit, then baskets of meat and sweet potato and pumpkin set on top, covered over with wet cloth and earth, and left to steam in the dark of the ground for half a day. There is no clever equipment and no hurry. When the earth is opened and the baskets are lifted out, the food carries the faint taste of smoke and soil, and the people standing around the pit have already been waiting and talking together for hours, which is partly the point. It is the same ground that vents steam at Rotorua and shakes the cups in a Christchurch cupboard, the ground the Alps are still rising out of, here, doing the gentlest work it ever does, cooking a family's dinner in its own slow heat. The unfinished land feeds the people who came last to find it. By the time the baskets are carried inside, the light that found the first coast this morning has crossed the whole country and is sliding off the far edge of the sea. The day that began at a gate in the far north is ending at a table in the south. And tomorrow, before almost anywhere else on Earth, it will begin again.
At the gate near Kaitaia, the call finally comes. The man steps off the wet grass and walks forward through the carved gateway, no longer waiting, the women's voices rising to meet him as he crosses onto the marae, and the held breath of the morning becomes an ordinary day, like any other day's work begun. Behind him, the light has already moved on, west across Auckland's harbour, south over the Canterbury Plains, out along the still water of Milford Sound. "25 million sheep are on their feet. In a rebuilt Christchurch street, the cups stay quiet in the cupboard.
Out past the coast, the sea is already brightening,